This video talks a little bit about relational database performance. And this is a very brief introduction to some of the tools and techniques you can use to increase the performance of your database. Keep in mind that these skills that you would use to increase performance typically fall under the responsibility of a DBA, or database administrator. But you might find yourself in that role at some point. But again, this presentation really is just to let you know where some of the tools are and that they exist, but it in no way is going to make you an expert in their use. Some people make their whole careers out of fixing queries and increasing database performance. So we're certainly not going to get there in this class, but at least this will introduce you to some of the techniques and tools that are out there. First of all, here's some query performance tips. Good database design equals better performance. It should seem self-explanatory, but it's true. And if you have a choice between using a join or a subquery, use a join. And the like operator, when you're pattern matching, is a performance hit. So if you're looking for dates or a particular year, use a range if you can. Limit nesting of objects. Limit use of triggers, since the rollback can be expensive. Using stored procedures and views is better than scripts for performance, since SQL Server can store execution or stored procedures. SQL Server can store execution plans and use caching. And limit the use of functions in large queries, because if you don't use the functions, then SQL Server has a better chance of caching the query. There are quite a few tools at your disposal when you're actually trying to assess and improve the performance of SQL Server. Let's take a quick look at these. So we're now in SQL Server, and we have a simple query going against AdventureWorks DW 2014. And this first query is joining the customer table with the fact internet sales table, and we're joining on the primary key and foreign key. And there is no index on customer in the fact internet sales table. And so we could run this query, but one of the tools that's at your disposal, and one that you'll probably use most frequently, and heads up, you'll have to use it for your homework assignment this week, is this thing called the Display Estimated Execution Plan. And this will now analyze your query and give you some information about each of the steps in your query. And the first thing we notice is that this index scan is non-clustered. For the query on the customer table, but it is a clustered index, which means it's all sequential. There's and you can tell some of the percentages. The query on the fact internet sales table is 60% of the query's time. So when you hover over each of these icons, you get a bunch more information. I have a link in the script that will link you to an explanation of what all the icons mean. And so you'll be doing that as part of your homework this week. So anyway, we have a query where only 5% of it is against the customer table, and over 60% of it is against the fact internet sales table. And I'll just go ahead and execute the query until we get some results. 60,398 rows. But now I'm going to create a, and actually I can look, I know it doesn't have an index, so I can just actually look at the table. Factor internet sales, indexes. The only index is the one on the primary key. So if I wanted to create an index on the foreign key, customer key, in the fact internet sales table, I can go ahead and do that using this code. And I think we learned how to do that earlier in this class. So I'm going to create an index, a non-clustered index, in the fact internet sales table on the customer key. And now when I go back and look and refresh my indexes display, I'm looking at the wrong table. I see I now have the index created. So, okay. So now when I run the this display, so it's query display estimated execution plan, I'm actually going to get a different view of this. So most of the query is now just doing the join of the two tables, and the actual query against the fact internet sales is much reduced. So key thing is when you're checking to see if a query can run faster, one of the things that you might consider is putting an index on a field that is going to be used in a query pretty frequently. So again, in the execution plan, you'll see all these different icons, and I don't think there's any way you would know what they mean now. There's a whole bunch of potential ones. So I have a link in this code where you can actually go and take a look and see all the different icons that are there and make some sense out of them. So we looked at the estimated execution plan. You can also look at the actual execution plan and see how well it matches. And typically it's going to match pretty closely. Okay, so this is like your first tool that you're going to use if you're diagnosing if you've got some query problems and if there are some ways that you can make them faster. We just took a look at execution plans. Another tool that you could use is SQL Server Profiler. Let's take a quick look at that. And you access that through in SQL Server Tools, SQL Server Profiler. And what this will do, so what the SQL Server Profiler will do, will create a trace and record and log all the things and performance hits that are going on in a file or a query. And you decide, what are the things that you would like to track. So it's essentially running in the background as your query is running, and you typically only run this for a short period of time because, as you can imagine, there is a performance hit. And so you would run this while a bad query was running, and then you could kind of understand some of the statistics that it would generate. Another tool is the Database Engine Tuning Advisor. Unfortunately, this is not available in SQL Server Express. But what it is used, if you were using a full version of SQL Server, then you would access it via the tools. And so even though it shows that it's here, it doesn't really run for SQL Server Express. But anyway, what it does do is it analyzes either a query or a script and kind of give you performance tips on things that you could do, like creating an index on a certain table. And you could use the output from the SQL Server Profiler as the input to this, and it would give you some suggestions. So that's pretty cool. The activity monitor is another thing that you can analyze. You probably need a lot more instruction before you could figure out what it was telling you, but it does give you some information. So there is an icon up in SQL Server where you can access it, but my screen has shrunk down so much I don't really see it, so I'm going to just try and access it another way. So you can access this activity monitor via an icon up in SQL Server, or Control-Alt-A is another way to access this. And you can adjust how often it's going to change or refresh. It's currently set to 10 seconds. I'll set it to 5 seconds. And then you've got a bunch of different windows or panes that'll you can take a look at. Give you an idea of what's going on with SQL Server. So this is the activity monitor. SQL Server also comes with some handy server stored procedures. It'll help you analyze what's going on with your queries. One of which is the SP_who2, and that gives you the current SQL Server users and processors, including the currently executing statement and whether the statement is blocked. SP_lock gives you information about the locks. SP space used is how much disk space is used by a table or a whole database. SP monitor gives you a bunch of statistics on SQL Server. And SP at SPID or a SPID gives you information about a particular user. So if I were to execute this now, I would find out that I am running system process 64. And now if I execute SP_who2, I'll see all the system processes that are running on SQL Server. And if I say, well, who is 64? I think that's who I was, right? Yeah, so it identifies who I am. So if you were to run this one and found out if there was a one SPID or SPID blocking somebody, you could use the SP_who2 to figure out who that person was, and then you could go knock on their door and say, hey, kill your query. SP monitor gives you a bunch of information about what's going on in SQL Server. And let's see what else. We're look through all these. Oh, there's one other one you should know about. And the system monitor, or if you just typed in perfmon down at the Windows search, you would get the Windows General Performance monitor, theoretically. And the performance monitor, that's what this looks like, finally did come up. And it'll give you some indication of all the things that are going on the server. So keep in mind, again, this was a really brief introduction to some of the tools that are available to you. Again, people make a living working with some of these tools and being experts on them. In fact, I have a link to a bunch of other resources in this week's resources window or page, and you can even download a book on just execution plans, if you're so inclined.